Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your consciousness transformation guide and originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. Happy Halloween. And if you're watching the video, is it a little bit weird that I came on with a cloak on today? Where I'm cloaking myself in this dark visage here. And as it's Halloween, it's a great time to be looking at this because what's funny is that we actually love looking at the dark side. I had a great time with this. It's actually my husband's costume that we use and actually it was part of his Merlin costume. But the funny thing is, like, we love the dark side and we love to hate it too. So I'm going to take this off. But the thing is, think about it. Halloween, we love to explore our dark side. It's like one time that we tend to really embrace ourselves and the dark parts of us. And like, we love watching horror movies. Like my husband this week has been constantly looking at, and we don't watch TV that much. He'll turn on the TV and look for some horror movies to put on, some classic horror movies and stuff. So it's really funny that we can give ourselves permission to do it, for Halloween or at certain times or whatever. But in general, once we get on what I call the conscious spiritual journey, we start to shun it. Yeah. Sue says this is the one time of the year we all let it go. That's right. But so the funny thing is, and now it's safe, right? It's safe to watch the horror movies. It's safe to say, oh, I love getting scared. I love going to haunted houses. I love doing this. I love doing that. So what sort of prompted this, there's been a lot that's been going on about the dark side lately. And there was this article that I read a week ago about this guy who runs this house. I think it's in Tennessee. And he's, it's claimed to be the scariest haunted house, scariest Halloween haunted house thing in the world. Nobody's ever gotten through it. He offers $20,000 to anybody who can get through it. You have to sign a 40-page waiver. You have to have a physical exam. You have to have all kinds of stuff and you have to do all these kind of prerequisites and whatever. So, it turns out, and when you read really into it, which I did, I read up on it and stuff. I said, it's really an interesting thing because people take the challenge. They think that's really cool. And he does it at Halloween, which, is the time when we like to explore our dark side. And apparently he uses light hypnosis and things like that to really get into people's darkest fears, which is why nobody ever gets past, it seems like people don't get past it. So the funny thing is, I looked at that and I said, wow, we talk about, and I posted this, last week, and I said, we talk about light work all the time, but there is such a thing as dark work. And dark work is just as powerful as the light work is, because it is a really big part of us to explore, to resolve, to be okay with, right? And we oh, shoot. I'm just opening my window here. Here we go. Good morning, Anne. Yeah. And so, so think about that. How many people have oh, I'm going to do this. I don't even know. I watched part of some movie he posted with a bunch of people who came out and they didn't make it through the haunted house. And anyway, so he does light hypnosis. He gets into their darkest fears, right? And then they cave, right? He pushes on them until they cave. And I said, oh, well, that's some incredible dark work, right? Now, if we turn it around, there's a little bit of ego in there about oh, well, I can do this so that you can never get through it. But, and I think some of the pre-work, to give away some of the secrets, I think part of it is he screens people out who can't be hypnotized and blah, 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 right? So anyhow, what a great, if we took something like that and actually utilized it with the intention for resolution within us and walking us through our own darkest fears, think of how powerful that is, right? And I know a lot of people who call themselves light workers, um, and say, and like I show them something like that, and they say, "Oh my God, I would just never do that. I wouldn't even think about doing that." And I'm like, "Really? So then what are you afraid of?" Like, if we sit here and we talk about being light workers, we also have to talk about being dark workers. And we have and it's because there is no light without the dark. And I've talked about this over and over and over again. But this is really, really an interesting thing. And really the creation of the dark had to do with separation, the idea of separation, the illusion of separation, where we said, okay, we're going to pretend we're separate, like pieces and parts are separate, and then we're going to forget that that's actually a game. And in those separation things are all these emotions are born, right? So there's fear, there's anxiety, there's anger, there's sadness, there's all kind of rage, there's all kinds of that energy, and it's all based in separation. As long as we're embodied and separate, and we are here, we have stuff in separation to look at, which means we have a dark side. And it's really funny. I was talking to somebody about this, and I think I talked about this a little bit last week in my podcast, and said, well, if you instead of saying light and dark, you said red and blue, like, and said, okay, I'm going to look at red and blue instead, right? You're like, oh, okay, that's no big deal. When I say light and dark, it's like, oh no, I don't have any dark side, right? There's a lot of that kind of stuff. What's really funny, let me tell you a story about this. So, like, think about what we could do if we actually did something like what this guy is doing with the haunted house, and we did it with the intention of helping us walk through our darkest shadows, right? Because once we do that, we resolve all of that. We come into a place of love and wholeness. And then there is no light or dark. There just is, like, that unconditional love of the divine, right? Because that is above and beyond the wholeness. And the wholeness is above and beyond light and dark. So let me tell you something funny. So recently I just held a retreat in Glastonbury, and in Glastonbury, UK, which is a very sacred place, and the heart chakra, considered the heart chakra by many, or some consider it the third eye chakra of the earth. It depends on who you talk to. Anyhow, and hey, Gloria, good morning. So I don't typically use a lot of external tools. Part of, Sue says, setting the intention is the key, right? I don't use a lot of external tools because part of, like, the Trinity Energy Progression practice that I teach is all about, it's all about, knowing that you have all the answers inside, you have all the power inside, and remembering how to access that, and getting through, like, flowing through stuff, and clearing all the blocks that prevent you from doing that, and being able to access that without anything external to us, right? But I do like to play. Like I always say, there are toys, there are tools and there are some tools, and we create the tools to reflect things back to us that we've forgotten. So in England, I was in a store, and I don't typically use, I mean, I have several decks, divination decks and tarot decks and whatever, but I don't really use them that much, only when I sort of get a little itch or whatever. And I was in the store, and my husband was on the retreat with us. And he looks at, we're looking at this whole wall of divination decks, and he points at that and he goes, "Isn't that interesting? What do you think of that deck?" And it was called the Dark Goddess deck. Okay. And right away I was like, oh, I need to get that. Like, what a great representation, right? Because what do we not like to look at within ourselves? We don't like to look at the darkness. And especially the more that, we talk and work in life, we try to exclude the darkness, which, by the way, creates more of it. So what better tool of reflecting back to us of the things that we don't want to look at, that we're, trying to push away because we're trying to accept ourselves only as light, than looking at something called the Dark Goddess, because what it is it's a whole representation of all kinds of representations of what we call the Dark Goddess, in all these cultures, all these belief systems, whatever, and utilizing and the energy that they reflect back to us, right? And the energy of that, like, is what is that darkness within us that's coming up to look at and to resolve and utilize on our growth, on our path to remembrance. So I got the deck. Right. And what was funny was, it's very unusual for me to like really like get into a deck like that and whatever. But I thought, oh, this is fascinating. I just want to check it out. So, oh, thank you for this. You're welcome. So we go back to the retreat house, and we're in the meditation room where we gather. And it was a free time or whatever. And I picked a card, and then like my husband and a couple of people picked a card with me. And then people one by one, they came in and they're like, oh, I want to pick one too. And I will tell you that a vast majority of people who picked one got really triggered by the card that they picked. And yet I could see that facet of them in the card of what they were talking about. And so it's funny because I looked at mine, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I can see that. And it's like showing you the things that we don't want to look at, right? That's what I think is beautiful about this. So the doing dark work, right? And like we talk about light work, the dark work is coming to the surface for so much, for love and embracing as part of the whole. By the way, we created this entire multiverse of separation, and in that we created the darkness through that separation, right? As I was talking about before. And so as we are moving and flowing to resolve it or to experience it and evolve into experiencing through it in a different way, is for us to really have to acknowledge the whole thing. Now, something I don't really talk about a lot, and this is because people get a little like weird and shocked and stuff like that. There's still a lot of judgment out there about dark work. But early on when I was working, after I brought Trinity Energy Progression in and was starting to teach it and practice it and whatever. And it was really what the core of it has to do with remembering to access the divine consciousness as a whole, right? And that it's all, part of the whole and blah, blah, blah. It's all within us. We all have that access and there's no externalization needed. And that all of these things are facets of the divine, including the dark faces that we've created as representations and symbols, right? The dark goddess, right? So I can look at all these cards, and you've got Maeve and determination, you've got Hecate and protection, you've got, let me just look at some here, Baba Yaga and loss. There's, and Callie's in here, and Nuba, and all Persephone, compliance, like all these things for us to look at underneath the surface, right? Okay, so who's the personification of darkness that we have created in most of our belief systems? Is Satan, right? Or Lucifer, or whatever you want to call it. Okay. So early on when I was working in this, I remember one time I was going to acupuncture because I was getting acupuncture like weekly. And my favorite place to do some really deep meditation work is on the acupuncture table. And so I was, on my way to acupuncture, I'm sitting at a light, and I got this, nudge, and it was saying, well, reach out to do work together with Lucifer. And I thought, right away, no matter how much we say, we can accept that, right? There's a part of you that goes, what are you talking about, right? So Sue says, do you feel if more dark work is done, it will help bring the energies back into balance? Well, yeah, not only balance, but resolution, because they come back together, right? And it's sort of like, I think, I'll go back to the story in a second, but I think it was in one of the last Star Wars movie when they talked about the more, of the like Jedi that are created, the more darkness that comes up, right? The more darkness comes up, the more Jedi come up, right? So it's like this balance that we create. But the thing is, the more that we fight it, the more we create darkness, right? So then we create this other bipolarity of like, oh, I'm only light, I'm only this or whatever. And when we say, no, I'm all of it, it comes back together into wholeness. And that's the key, not whether you're all light, because nobody's all light, because light is the opposite of dark. And we have that duality in this multiverse. So when we come to that wholeness is when we come to that acceptance, and then the light and the dark stop existing. And then there just becomes that whole unconditional love, like for lack of a better word. Okay. So anyway, so back to the story. So I get this nudge, we'll do some work with Lucifer. And I was like, what? And I was like, okay, I sort of blew that off, right? And I got there to acupuncture. I get on the table, I'm all pinned up, I'm like going to float out, and then I get the reach out and do some work with Lucifer. I was like, okay, right? And so this is all like, well, as defined consciousness, it's all me. So I'm going out there to really reach out to the part of me that I consider the part I shudder about, right? So I did. And I remember the first time it was very cold and hard and dark. And the energy was this tremendous amount of resistance. And I knew it was collective as much as individual. And the work together was coming together, and one is unconditional love. And the more I did that, the more things started to soften. And I can't quite explain. That's about the closest I can come to explaining it. And I thought, well, that was really fascinating. And at the end, I felt a lot of gratitude from me and from, I guess, Lucifer, or whatever you want to call as Lucifer. Okay, so for a period of several months back then, I got called to do that multiple times. And the more I did that, it was really working on our dark side, collectively and individually. And the more I would connect with that individual, right, the more I saw him as like how we created that persona as an archangel, right? And so the funny thing was, before all this happened, I think it was about a year before then, there was this group that used to put out these guided meditations. And I would, sometimes I would resonate with them, sometimes not. It was all about the evolution of the planet. It was for us to all do, to resolve within ourselves and whatever. And there was one about the darkness. And you're flying along, you go into this cave, and then you see this fallen angel, right? And he's burdened with the weight of the world on his shoulders, and it was Lucifer. And I'd forgotten about this at this point. It was like I said, it was like a year before this point of what had happened. And I remember when I was doing that guided meditation, and I saw Lucifer in that cave, I started to cry with so much gratitude for creating, for that persona taking on what we call our darkness, right? And being the arrow to hold that burden of darkness as that persona. And I thought, what a beautiful, and the whole thing was about releasing him from that burden, and that we take responsibility for our own duality in creation, so that that persona now can be free and resolve and everything else. It was a beautiful meditation. Anyway, so like fast forward, a year goes by, and I think that's all great. And then that comes up, and then I was like, oh, and then I do that one little session, and it was great. And then I start doing some sessions that I'm called to do that with, and I'd reach out and ask, is it okay? And I'd get yes. And it was hesitant at first, and then it was like more so solid later on. But what was beautiful about that was I came into much resolution about that within myself. And an acceptance of like, yeah, of course, Lucifer, Satan, like demons, they're all part of the whole. That's all us. It's all of it as a part and facet of us reflected back to ourselves in some sort of duality. Okay. And it's for us to come back into the whole that resolves it all. There's no, like, the thing is we've gone into this whole thing that's sort of backwards, upside down, of like the battle against evil, the battle of good versus evil and whatever, or the crusade against evil. When it's like, well, when we accept and embrace it and say, yes, you are me, and I accept you and embrace you as who you are, as part of the whole and divine as you are as well, then it goes away. Because guess what? Darkness is powered by resistance and exclusion. And as soon as it is encompassed with love, it goes away and it doesn't exist anymore. And the thing is, and I guess the opposite, I never really thought about it this way, but I guess the opposite happens with light. As soon as we accept it, not as it's something on its own, but as part of the whole, along with darkness and equality, that goes away too. And that's actually when we can go beyond and get to unconditional love and get to true divine consciousness and remembrance. So the thing is to like accept and look at that stuff, right? And over the years after that initial period of time where I was guided to do work with Lucifer specifically, then I would actually have, because I came into this place of acceptance and resolution, like when I was working with some people and they were ready to get to the place where they're hitting like the darkest crevices and they're ready to do the dark work so that they can resolve and move forward in wholeness within themselves, that's when Lucifer would show up, like to help and support them in resolving that, right? Because part of, if you go back to that original like meditation, which was one of the most powerful things I ever did, and I remember that, and it was like, well, it's taking the burden of that persona away so that persona can resolve and be part of the whole again, like we should do, like it's important for us to do with everything else and all the other parts that we've created, all the ascended masters and the archangels and however we want to look at it, as well as the demons, right? Lilith is another dark goddess, and she's in this dark goddess deck, and she is, called the mother of demons and stuff, but she is a key to resolution of the darkness within ourselves and to wholeness. And that's it can be some challenging work because we're so used to resisting that part of ourselves. But if we look at it straight on, it loses its power. Like it's something to continue to practice, and you can put your toe in and begin to look at that. But think about it. It makes sense when you look at it from that holistic perspective. But anyhow, so the thing is, it's really interesting, and what I was shown in terms of the whole of separation when I was doing that work with Lucifer and that resolution was, well, separation was created to look at this reflection, right? To be able to reflect back to ourselves. And the further the further away we exclude, the deeper that we make that darkness and separation, the more clarity we get in what we reflect back to ourselves, right? That's sort of how we created it. And and so here's the thing, the colors that we see, right? The textures that we feel, the sense that we smell, the things we taste, all those things, everything that we sense in any kind of separation or identity or whatever was beautifully created through separation and is a part of the darkness. I mean, we just call it that. I mean, it's just a part of separation, but really that's what darkness is. Okay. And without the depth, like look at when you sketch something, right? So when you look at something that you sketch and you have no shadows in it, you have no depth to the picture, right? So what if you took all the depth out of like the colors and the darkness and whatever in this world? We have nothing. It would be flat. It wouldn't be as rich and saturated of an experience as what we've created, right? We wouldn't be able to feel the touch, and we wouldn't, and when we're as fascinated by pain and suffering as we are by love and passion and softness, right? We love to like hate the villains in stories, like what would Star Wars be without Darth Vader and the Siths and whatever, Sith Lords and stuff like that. There are so many movies out there that was funny. If you look at them, they were created without like really an antagonist, but then they were like not really well received because nobody wants to watch it without an antagonist. That's what the dark side is. And so, we play with it on Halloween and we think it's great. And then every other day of the year, we shun it and put it in the closet. But the thing is, like I said, it's time for us to love it and accept it for what it is, for the lessons that we chose to create through that creation, and to thank them, to thank that dark side of ourselves, to have gratitude for that. And when we have the darkness come up, it's reflecting something back to us. And by the way, we can change that. We can change our whole way of learning and experiencing, because we believe, many of us believe at a collective level, that we can't learn without darkness, right? That it has to be through suffering or through some kind of thing we overcome, which is usually an exclusion of some sort, pain, sadness, anger, all kinds of stuff like that. All darkness. And so we collectively think that and individually do, right? Sickness, injury, heartbreak, all things like that. But we don't. We actually can learn differently. We can remember differently. We can remember without, like I am an epitome of waking up one morning and remembering the universe. And I didn't have a near-death experience. I didn't have a traumatic event in my life. I set it up for myself so that it was going to happen that way. it was traumatic for me because I didn't know what was going on. And I was like, what? I went to sleep one person, I woke up and I knew an entire universe of stuff. And it was pretty overwhelming, right? But I didn't need to create the catalyst. And I think that's part of, what I'm also here to help, remember is you don't have to have that, right? But to do those kind of lessons to evolve and continue without needing to have that friction is for us to look at the dark side and resolve it. But the more we say, I don't have it, oh, no, 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 I don't have it. I don't have a dark side. And the thing is, like, if you're triggered by that, that's something to look at. If you can't look at like one of these cards in the Dark Goddess deck, right? Like I said, it was really interesting how most everyone was triggered, like, except for those of us who were like, okay, yeah, I see what that's there to show me. That is some of the most powerful, like, remembering that we do. At some point later on, after all that stuff had gone on, and then it was funny because when I was a kid, I actually was fascinated with horror movies. I had a great grandmother who was one of my primary caretaker as a child, and she loved horror movies. And she'd be like, "Oh, don't tell your mother. I let you watch this," because that was when HBO first came out and all that kind of stuff, And she would let me read books that she read, the Amityville Horror. I think I read when it first came in. I think it was like 9 years old or something crazy, and I was fascinated with that stuff, right? Well, when I got into all of this, like, I sort of shunned it for a while, even though I had been doing all this dark work. I don't like watching any horror movies, whatever. At one point, I got the message: watch them, watch some of the darkest things, because it's when you can sit and watch them in a space of love and acceptance and whole, like, as part of that, as part of the wholeness. That's when it starts to really resolve. So I did. And that was a really interesting experience. I think I went to see The Conjuring at the movies. And I was like, okay, which is a pretty creepy movie. So I was like, okay, and it has a lot of dark energy in it, right? So I was like, okay, I can do this. I mean, I can do this with people. I work with dark entities. I've worked with, like, clearing houses and clearing spaces and people having attachments. But the funniest thing is that we stop watching dark movies and we judge them like, oh, blah, 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 right? So I went to the movies and I sat there and I watched it. And I had to remind myself constantly through that movie that it was part of me. It was part of us. And to embrace it and have gratitude for it. And I had such a powerfully different experience by doing that while I was watching that movie. And came to resolution, and then I watched a couple more. It was a lot easier. And it's like, well, okay, I can watch them, I cannot watch them. Then I become to complete, like, ambivalence to it, which is really the key, is to have no resistance and pull either way. Like, okay, if it's in front of me, that's great. If not, that's great. Now, the funny thing is, I read about that guy's, haunted house thing in Tennessee, and I was just like, do I want to do that? And I'm like, is it the people who are going that are causing that to happen, or is it truly that it's just something to show us to start looking at within ourselves, right? Because people go to do it as the challenge, right? But usually the people are going as a challenge are very ego-based, right? But if you go without the ego base, does it change the experience? Or will you even be allowed to do it? Because when you can see things from the wholeness, you are less apt to be influenced by others. I don't know. I've been sort of sitting on that. And I'm like, oh, I was like, well, so I looked at that and I was like, do I want to do it? I don't think it's important, because I'm like, well, it might be great for some people. I think it'd be great thing for people to look at that side of them, that darkest part, because it's really easy to do it, an easy way to do it. But do we have to torture ourselves to do it? Probably not. Maybe because we deny it so much, right? Because the guy was talking about how, like, he said people come back and want to sue him and everything else, and he records all the sessions so that he can play them back and say, no, they think I did this, but this is really what happened because of that light hypnosis. He's like, I could put somebody in a pool of like 4 inches of water and convince them they're in a big deep pool with like great white sharks, surrounding them. So interesting. So the thing is, well, what would that be? What would that be for me to look at the darkest part of me? And then it's like, or do we create that? If I come into acceptance and say, okay, it is what it is, do we further create it by, sort of intention? I don't know. That'd be something to think about. But I don't have real resistance to doing it. I also don't have a real drive to do it either. My husband was like, oh, I'll do it. I would love to do that. And I'm like, eh, I would like to see more about it and like try a piece of that. And I don't know. I think there's something more to it though that's really important to see, right? And if we use that as a tool or like whatever to really work our way through it, it does come into balance. Like Sue asked earlier, it does help us and we use balance of like that, like sort of a scale, but really I look at it as it helps us come into wholeness. And that is the key, because it's when we are in our wholeness is that we really remember our enlightened divine selves that we are, and we can really be it in every single cell and every single like piece of our embodiment and part of our experience that we have. So that's it for today. I want you to take a good look at that this week. I mean, what a great day, right? It's Halloween. Look at that darkness within yourself, and start to look at those little pieces, because then often those are the biggest clues for us to look at what there is to shift, to move forward from where we are into a different place. Not as something to fear or to repress, which then, by the way, gives it more anger, more power. But if we let it come out into the light and we didn't judge it, and we saw it for what it was and let it resolve as part of the wholeness and thanked it for the lessons that it was there to give us, think of how quickly things would change. If you come to me and say, I'm going to tell people about this about you, and I say, okay, took all the power away, right? That's authenticity and honesty and unconditional acceptance. And when you're in that place, you don't care what other people think. You don't think you can have anything taken away from you, and therefore you have no darkness. Like, that's when the darkness goes away, and as the light, it just becomes wholeness and divine. So have a great Halloween. Happy Halloween, Gloria. Have a great Halloween. Enjoy your dark side. Embrace it and have gratitude for it, and know that that's one of the biggest steps for our wholeness. And we'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing out on this week's Living the Shift. Have a great one.